family first.
Yeah. Do you know that there is some layman that is working in your district?
Yes, Pastor Val already informed me, and the layman who's in charge in my district is already they're the couple whom I trusted when I had a problem with another church member.
Oh, good. Do
Yeah.
you know how many laymen are working in your district?
As far as in my place, I only knew one. I don't know in other places.
Okay, good to know.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. And it's an honor to be able to join you for Bible study. We're going through the book of Numbers, and what our goal is as we go through these stories of the children of Israel as they're going up to the promised land is to focus on the stories. And so tonight what we're going to do is cover a lot of material. I'm going to skip over a lot of material as well, and you're welcome to go back and read and study that on your own. But just to kind of stay with our theme of kind of the stories, the journey, that's why we're kind of going to be kind of switching over things. So let's bow our heads and we will start with prayer. God in heaven, we want to thank you for giving us the Bible. We thank you for Zoom and YouTube and the other options to be able to connect. And I just pray that tonight, each one of us would just be impressed with your power, with your glory, with your might, but also with your love to the humans. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Now let's turn in our Bibles to Numbers chapter 2. We're going to do a little review work. Numbers chapter 3 is where we left off last week. So we're going to go to Numbers chapter 2. And if you remember, they numbered all of the Israelites. They looked at each tribe, and they had a leader for each tribe. And then God actually even told them exactly where they're going to camp. And we talked about that last week. We showed a little picture of kind of their campsites and the general area they were to camp in. But one tribe was not numbered, and that was the tribe of Levi. And when you look at the family of Jacob had his name changed to Israel, and Israel had 12 sons. Out of those 12 sons, each of those sons had their own kind of tribe or clan. And so you have the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Issachar and the tribe of Naphtali. But the tribe of Levi, known as the Levites, they were kind of taken out of the count. And so you might say to yourself, well, then how can you have 12 tribes if the tribe of Levi is taken out of the count? Well, you don't have the tribe of Joseph. You have the tribe of Benjamin, the tribe of Simeon, the tribe of Issachar and Judah, but you don't have the tribe of Joseph. And if you remember, Joseph was one of the sons of Israel. But instead of the tribe of Joseph, what they did was they made tribes out of Joseph's two sons. So Joseph had two sons when he lived down in Egypt. His two sons were known as Ephraim and Manasseh. And so Joseph, there's not a tribe known as Joseph, but there is a tribe of Ephraim and Manasseh. So when you look at the tribes of Israel, there's actually 13 tribes. There's all of his sons, except for Joseph, and then Joseph had two. And the reason for this is generally whenever the parents would have the birthright, give the birthright to their children, the oldest son would get a double portion. Now, Joseph was not the firstborn son of Jacob, but he was the firstborn son from Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel. And so when you look, you will find that Joseph, both of his sons became tribes. So essentially, Joseph had two tribes when everybody else had one tribe. But here's the interesting thing. In the whole birthright spiritual and physical inheritance model that we find in the Old Testament. The oldest son got the birthright, but also the oldest son, along with the birthright, got the spiritual leadership responsibilities for the family. Well, that's not what you will find with Ephraim and Manasseh. With Ephraim and Manasseh, they're considered tribes. So Joseph got a double portion, but it was the tribe of Levi that got the spiritual prerogatives. And so whenever we look here, last week we looked at all of the tribes, and you went down 12 tribes, including Ephraim and Manasseh, but we didn't talk anything about Levi. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the Levites. And I know that this might be kind of boring, kind of dry, complicated. So we're going to kind of move quickly through it, but just understand that the tribe of Levi was a very special tribe. It was a very special, they were given a very special job for God and his work. So take a look with me at Numbers chapter 2 and verse 31. Numbers chapter 2 and verse 31. All who were numbered of the forces with Dan, 157,600, they shall break camp last with their standards. So remember last week we talked about how God told where each tribe is going to camp. And Judah was going to be the tribe that leaves first when they go on their journeys. And then Dan is going to be the last one. And so this is a little review from last week. Verse 32. So we're in Numbers chapter 2, verse 32. These are the ones who were numbered of the children of Israel by their fathers' houses. All who were numbered according to their armies of the forces were 603,550. Again, these are numbering anybody over the age of 20. So a man over the age of 20 would be marriageable age. So we could assume that a man that's over the age of 20 would have a wife. So as soon as you look at 600,000 and then you count a wife, now you're at 1.2 million. And then if they were to have 1 or 2 children, just an average of 2 children, then you're getting up to 2.4 million at that point. So you can see how this was a large group of people. And one of the things that is just amazing is how God is able to take a group of people that had been in slavery and be able to organize them in an orderly fashion. God is brilliant. And even though when you get to Numbers, you can kind of get bogged down in numbers, literally bogged down in the numbers and all the details. But what God was doing was he was not working with a people for generations to try to get them to be a kingdom. He takes them out of Israel, and within 1 year, just 1 year, he has them just like an organized, orderly group of people. And the way he did it was he just organized them all down to exactly where they were even going to sleep and where they were going to camp. Now, this isn't where God is being a dictator and saying, you know, I'm going to do what you have to do what I say, you have to think what I say and everything else. But as he organizes all of them, they're on a journey. They're going to the promised land. And God isn't here to just kind of say, well, let's just kind of bebop along in the wilderness and you can check out the trees and check out the rocks. And some of you that are fast can run ahead and some of you that are slow, well, good luck to you. I hope you're able to make it. No, what God here is doing is he is saying, okay, we're moving. And we're going to move in an organized fashion, and we're not going to leave the stragglers behind. We're not going to leave the sick and the old people behind while the young people run ahead to get the best spots. No, they're just moving ahead along in an orderly fashion. But look what it says here in verse 33. We're in Numbers 2, verse 33. But the Levites were not numbered among the children of Israel, just as the Lord commanded Moses. And you will find this throughout the rest of Scripture too. You won't find that Scripture talks about the 12 tribes of Israel. 13 tribes of Israel. Scripture talks about the 12 tribes of Israel and the tribe of Levi. So that's why you'll find here where it says the Levites were not numbered with the children of Israel. They were separate. They were distinct. Notice what it says in verse 34. Thus the children of Israel did according to all that the Lord commanded Moses. So they camped by their standards, and so they broke camp, each one by his family according to their father's houses, organized. And this was not something where you would have people being kind of dejected and sad. These people suddenly look at themselves, this hodgepodge group of slaves, and now they have self-respect. They have dignity because they have a place. Your place is there and your place is there, and they know exactly what they're doing. It's like dogs. When you get a dog and you don't train the dog, he's not a happy dog. But when you have a dog that's trained, animals can be so happy when they're trained. And it's the same with children. Children, and you've probably seen this, where you see a family where the children just do whatever they want, and people yell at them and smack them around, and they don't know what's going on. They don't know what's going to happen next. But children that are loved, that have strong boundaries, where parents have good, healthy boundaries and good, healthy, respectable discipline, the children know exactly what's expected of them, and they are happy children. And so the children of Israel, with God as their leader, they were a happy people. They can look around their ranks. They can walk up to a little hill near their camp and look down over the camp with just so organized. I'm sure they were just so proud. Here we were just a year ago, and we were slaves in Egypt, living along the Nile River in mud brick homes, and just slaving every day out there, looking for straw and trying to make bricks for the storehouses of Egypt. And now look at us. I'm sure that they probably just were very pleased. Well, it didn't last long, and we're going to get to that here in just a moment. But now what we're going to do is we're going to go and talk about the sons of Aaron, or the Levites. Okay? But I want you to notice in verse 34, so we're in Numbers 2, verse 34, thus the children of Israel did according to all the Lord commanded Moses. So they camped by their standards. This word standards is used several times in the book of Numbers. And essentially, each tribe had a standard. And what a standard was it was like a flag or a large sign on a stick. And this identified their camp. This gave them identity. And we don't know what was on the standards. However, Jewish rabbinical tradition tells us what was on the standards. And we're going to talk about that in a little while. But now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the sons of Aaron. Now, just to make something very clear, and if you're writing this down, you might want to write this down. You have a son of Jacob known as Levi. And Levi married a lady, started having children, and they had children who had children who had children, and they had a tribe known as the Levites. Aaron was a Levite. So Aaron was of the tribe of Levi, and Aaron and his sons were chosen out of Levi. So when you look at all of the children of Israel, there's a small group, the Levites, that were chosen to be separate, apart from the other people, the other tribes in Israel. So the Levites were separate, and in the Levites, there was a family known as the family of Aaron, and they were separated from the Levites, and that family was the family of priests. Now, out of the Aaron's family, there was one person that was separate from the priests, and that was the high priest. That was Aaron, and the way the Aaronic priesthood went is that if you wanted to be a priest in Israel, you had to be a direct descendant of Aaron. And if you wanted to be a high priest, that wasn't something that you were like, I want to do this, because Aaron, when he died, the high priesthood went to his son. When he died, it went to his son. So when you look at the Levites were this unique group where they had the Levites were chosen. They were called out from the rest of the children of Israel. And then from the Levites, there was a smaller group that was called out, the family of Aaron. And then from the family of Aaron, there was a smaller group that was called out, which would have just one person, which would be the high priest. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the sons of Aaron. And as soon as you hear sons of Aaron, immediately you think priesthood, priests, okay? So Numbers chapter 3, verse 1. Now these are the records of Aaron and Moses when the Lord spoke with Moses on Mount Sinai. And these are the names of the sons of Aaron, Nadab, the firstborn, and Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. These are the names of the sons of Aaron, the anointed priests, whom he consecrated to minister as priests. So Aaron, he's an old man. He's in his, I think he's in his 90s at this point, or in his high 80s at this point. He has 4 sons, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. Nadab and Abihu, we think were probably the 2 older ones. And Nadab and Abihu were a little bit independent, we could say. And after they were dedicated as priests to serve God, Nadab and Abihu one day had a big drunken party, and they got really drunk, and they went up to the sanctuary, and they were officiating as priests, drunk. One of the things a priest would always do is they would carry a little metal bowl with a wire cage over the top that was hanging from chains, and this was known as a censer. They would fill it with incense, and then they would use fire from the altar, and then as they would carry this around, it would create a nice smell, and this was a symbol of how the priests are always to be praying for God's people. The religious leaders were always supposed to be praying for God's people because incense is a symbol of prayer. The day they got drunk, and this happened soon after they became priests, the day they got drunk, they went up to the temple and they were drunk, so they couldn't remember all the instructions. And so they actually started the fire themselves. And so they decided, you know what? We'll just light our own fire. We don't have to get the fire from the altar. And the fire from the altar had been started by God. And so by them burning incense with a fire they started, this was essentially symbolic of them saying, we don't need God's help. We don't need God's fire. We don't need God's presence. We don't need God's power in our lives. We can do this on our own. Well, God had to make an example out of them. And so God struck them dead. And so out of the 4 priests, you have the high priest, Aaron, and then the 4 priests that served under him. 2 of them were killed. And so we find it mentioned here just in passing, but if any of you want to read about this, just jot down on your paper Leviticus chapter 10, because Leviticus chapter 10 goes into more of the detail about them presumptuously going up to serve God while they were drunk. So we're in Numbers chapter 3 and verse 4. Nadab and Abihu had died before the Lord when they offered profane fire before the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai, and they had no children. So Eleazar and Ithamar ministered as priests in the presence of Aaron, their father. So just those 4 verses just kind of talk about the priests, and then now we're going to talk about the Levites. Verse 5, so we're in Numbers 3, verse 5. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, bring the tribe of Levi near and present them before Aaron the priest, that they may serve him. And they shall attend to his needs and the needs of the whole congregation before the tabernacle of meeting to do the work of the tabernacle. Also, they shall attend to all the furnishings of the tabernacle of meeting and to the needs of the children of Israel to do the work of the tabernacle. And you shall give the Levites to Aaron and his sons, and they are given entirely to him from among the children of Israel. So you shall appoint Aaron and his sons, and they shall attend to their priesthood. But the outsider who comes near shall be put to death. So what God here does is he says, okay, Aaron and his sons are going to be the priests. They're going to have the priesthood. But the Levites are going to they're going to be in charge of the sanctuary, and they're there to assist the priests. Now, they're not there to take the job of a priest. They're not going to say, oh, you're running short today. Let me just put on my priestly robes and help you. No, the Bible makes it clear that they were not going to do that, but they were going to assist. Later on in the history of Israel, you will find the Levites become the teachers of the law. And so the priests would be the ones that were officiating in the sanctuary and in the temple, but the Levites were the ones that would teach people what these symbols meant. It's kind of like today. We have pastors, we have elders, we have deacons, we have deaconesses, you have Bible workers, and all of us work together, but each of us has a role. And back in ancient times, you'll have the priests and the Levites. Now, one of the things that's interesting is I've heard people that are against women having any job at church or anything like that, and they will say, well, there was no female priests. There was no female priests. They were only males. And I have my personal opinions on who should serve God, and I don't think it should be gender, but I also don't think we should take and just put a woman into a position because she's a woman. And I don't think we should just put a man into a position because he's a man, or because he's white, or because he's Hispanic, or because he's Filipino or Black. I really think you have to look at the person and say, does this person have the talents, and is this person humble, and can God use this person in that position? But one of the things that it's important to remember is the priests were all male. The priests also were all Levites. And the priests also weren't just Levites, they were of the tribe of Aaron. But the Levites, they were the ones that served there at the temple and at the sanctuary. And the Levites were the ones who took the sanctuary up and down. They moved it in their wilderness wanderings. And the Levites also were, so to speak, the Bible workers. They were the ones that taught people about God. And we don't find there's any, that I've been able to find, any restriction on the female Levites doing this. So we don't have this clearly written in the Bible, but it's implied that probably the female Levites worked with the female women, the other women of the different tribes, and the males probably worked with the males so that they were able to minister and help spread God's understanding to all of Israel. Paul says later that the gospel was preached to them just like the gospel is preached to us. And so when we look at Israel, they had the gospel preached to them through the sanctuary, through the types and symbols of the sanctuary, but also explained to them with the Levites. Now, look at verse 11, okay? So we're in Numbers chapter 3, verse 11. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, now behold, I myself have taken the Levites from among the children of Israel instead of every firstborn who opens the womb among the children of Israel. Therefore, the Levites are to be mine, because all the firstborn are mine. On the day that I struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I sanctified to myself all the firstborn in Israel, both man and beast. They shall be mine. I am the Lord. So what we see here is, like I told you earlier, the firstborn was the one that was dedicated to God. The firstborn received a double inheritance, not only of the material wealth from the father, but the firstborn also was to be the spiritual leader. Well, starting now with the children of Israel, it wasn't going to be the firstborn of every family. It was going to be the Levites. And God here says, I have taken the Levites instead of the firstborn. And so what we refer to this is the Levitical priesthood and the Levitical consecration or setting apart that God does now for the Levites. Now, instead of every household having the man of the household or the firstborn son offering sacrifices and being the spiritual leader, God now institutes the Levites to do this. Now, they do a census of the Levites and they number them, okay? And they find that there was 3 sons of Levi. So we're going to skip down to verse 17. So we're in Numbers 3:17. 3 different groups of Levites. These were the sons of Levi by their names: Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. So Levi, many, many years before, he had 3 sons, and his 3 sons were Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Well, Gershon had his children, and Kohath had his children. And so now you have clans or families within the tribe. So of the tribe of Levi, you take the whole tribe of Levi, and now you have 3 different groups. Okay, so it goes down and it gives us their names. And it just kind of looks at their different names and stuff. And so what we're going to do is we are going to skip down to verse 22. Okay, so we're going to look at the family of Gershon, verse 22. Those who were numbered according to the number of all the males from a month old and above, all those who were numbered, there were 7,500. Notice the difference. When we're numbering the Levites, we are not numbering men 20 years and older. Now we are numbering babies. Notice what it says, 1 month and older. So what you will find here is that when we numbered Israel, it was almost, you could say, a militaristic numbering. So it's like anybody who is old enough, strong enough, mature enough to be a soldier, age of 20, we number them. But now when we come to the Levites, because they are going to be dedicated to God from birth to be his people, his tribe, they're numbering them now from the age of 1 month. So of the family of Gershon, we have 7,500. Verse 23, the families of the Gershonites were to camp behind the tabernacle westward. And the leader of the father's house of the Gershonites was Elisaphath, the son of Lael. The duties of the children of Gershon in the tabernacle of meeting include the tabernacle, the tent with its covering, the screen for the door of the tabernacle of meeting, the screen for the door of the court, the hangings of the court which are around the tabernacle, and the altar and their cords according to all the work related to them. So not only does God tell this family of Levites, remember there's 3 groups in the family of Levites, we're talking about the Gershonites here, but he gives them their job, and their job is pretty much, you could say, related to all the coverings. The coverings, the veils, the entrances, and you might say that's a pretty easy job. Well, it's not like today where you have really strong, robust material that's light. In ancient times, these were made out of skins of animals, a lot of these coverings. And these coverings made out of skins of animals could be 2 or 3 or 800 pounds. I mean, they were very heavy. Then you also have the linen that was used around the sanctuary courtyard. And this would have to be washed on a regular basis and carefully cared for. Because remember, they're out in a desert-like area where there's going to be high winds. Then you have the different veils. So when you look at this job, it's not just a matter of, oh, okay, you guys are in charge of all of the material. It's like they're not only in charge of setting it up and taking it down, they're in charge of repairs. They're in charge of making new ones. They're in charge of cleaning. I mean, this is a pretty big job they have. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the second of the clans, and we see this in verse 27. So we're in Numbers 3, verse 27. From Kohath came the family of the Amramites, the family of the Ishtharites, the family of the Hebronites, and the family of the Aziliites. These were the families of the Kohathites. According to the number of all the males from a month old and above, there were 8,600 keeping charge of the sanctuary. The families of the children of Kohath were to camp on the south side of the tabernacle. And the leader of the father's house of all the families of the Kohathites was Elizaphan, the son of Aziel. Now, remember last time I told you when we look at the names of the children of Israel, 8 out of the 12 names of their leaders had El in them, the name of God. And out of their parents, so-and-so was the son of so-and-so. Out of their parents, only one did. Well, one of the things you'll find about the Levites is even in the names of the Levites, you will find God's name in the first and second generation. So we saw this with the Gershonites. With the Gershonites, if you notice that the name of the leader of the Gershonites, verse 24, was Eliasaph, the son of Lael. So Eliasaph, God is in his name, and he's the son of Lael, another name for God. So when we look at this, and you can look this up in your Bible concordance, you will see that both the the leader and his father both had God's name in their name. Now we go to the next group of Jewish Levites, Kohath, of the family of Kohath, or we call these the Kohathites, and look at their name of their leader, verse 30. And the leader of the father's house of the families of the Kohathites was Elizaphan, the son of Aziel. Again, El is in both of those names, El, and El is Hebrew abbreviation for God, or Elohim. Now, what did the Kohathites, what was their job? Verse 31. Their duty includes the ark, the table, the lampstand, the altars, the utensils of the sanctuary with which they ministered, the screen, and all the work related to them. So what we see here is that the first group we talked about, the Gershonites, they were involved with all of the tent, you could say, veils and all of the coverings. This group, known as the Kohathites, they were involved with the actual articles, the Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, the altar of incense, the lampstands, and all the utensils. Verse 30, and the leader of the father's house of the families of the Kohathites was, not verse 30, verse 32. My apologies. Numbers chapter 3, verse 32. And Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, was to be chief over the leaders of the Levites, with oversight of those who kept charge of the sanctuary. So you find this structure where you have the families, and then above the families you have a leader, and above that you have a supervisor, and one of the supervisors over this group of people was one of the priests. Now we're going to go to the third Levitical group, the third family of Levi, and they were known as the Merari. Verse 33. From Merari come the family of the Mahites and the family of the Mushites. These were the family of Merari. Excuse me. Verse 34. And those who were numbered according to the number of all the males, not 20 years old, but a month old and above, was 6,200. The leader of the father's house of the families of Merari was Zerel, the son of Abihail. These were to camp on the north side of the tabernacle. And the appointed duty of the children of Merari included the boards of the tabernacle, its bars, its pillars, its sockets, its utensils, all the work related to them. And the pillars of the court all around with their sockets, their pegs, and their cords. Moreover, those who were to camp before the tabernacle in the east, not before we get to 38. So when we look at the Merari, their job was, you could say, the structure of the sanctuary. So the first group we talked about over in verse 21, the Gershonites, they were in charge with all of the cloth, the skins, the covering, the veil. Then you come down to the Kohathites, and the Kohathites, their job was to be in charge of all of the furniture, all of the altars, and all of the articles of furniture. Then we come over to the Merari, the last group, and the Merari were in charge of all of the boards, the pegs, the brackets, the posts. So you can just imagine, okay? Just imagine with me that you have to let's just say we're going to pitch the tabernacle. We've arrived at our camp and it's time to put up the tabernacle. The way I visualize it is the Merari are going to go and they're going to quickly put up all of the posts. They're going to tie up all the posts, put up all of the ropes. They're going to put up all of the wood bars. And then you have what was that other group we talked about? The Gershonites, and they come and they put the coverings over and they have all the coverings up. And then the other group, at the same time, they're setting up all the articles. So essentially, they could have this camp pitched and the sanctuary up and ready for service in maybe, let's say, an hour or 2 hours. And then when it's time to go, not only do they have to have their camps ready to go, but they have to get this camp ready to go too. So when we're talking about, 6,000 people, these 6,000 people are not just focused on the sanctuary to get it ready to go for traveling. It's also going to be, they have to get their stuff ready as well. So there's probably going to be teams that are rotating through. Now, verse 38. Moreover, those who were to camp before the tabernacle in the east, before the tabernacle of meeting, was Moses, Aaron, and his sons, keeping charge of the sanctuary to meet the needs of the children of Israel. But the outsider who came near was to be put to death. Now, I'm just going to share my screen with you for just a moment. And I want to just show you the picture we had from last week. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Alice. So this is what we talked about last week, okay? Now I know this can be very kind of dry and stuff, and we're moving through, but I want you to just kind of look at this picture, and what you will find is that the way God set up his camp is he wants to be right in the middle. Do you see the very middle of camp is the tabernacle? And when God came to Moses, he said, let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell amongst them. And he literally wanted to be right in the middle of them. This is not a foreign deity or a pagan deity or a heathen god that wants to be far away and let the people approach with fear and trembling. No, what God says is I'm going to be right here, and then I want you to be all around me. So if you wanted to, if you were to take a drone or a helicopter and look at the camp of Israel, you would find the sanctuary. And in the sanctuary is the holy place and the most holy place. And in the middle of the holy place is the Ark of the Covenant. That Ark of the Covenant is the center point. That is the very middle of the whole camp of Israel. And so when you look here, what you'll find is that the entrance, see right here, the entrance to the tabernacle was on the east side. And we just read that Moses and the priests were to camp right here at the east side. And if you notice what it says, why their job is, verse 38, moreover, those who were to camp before the tabernacle on the east, before the tabernacle of meeting, were Moses, Aaron, and his sons, keeping charge of the sanctuary to meet the needs of the children of Israel. So this is the job of a priest. The job of the priests were to meet the needs of the house of Israel. The job of our heavenly priest is to meet the needs of the house of Israel, we could say, or to you. And it's just so beautiful when you look how it's not like Moses and the priests are camped way off to the side, leave us alone. No, they were right here. I mean, if you were coming anywhere from around camp, you would go right beside Moses and the priest's tent as you go into the entrance to the tent of meeting. Now, last week we talked about how you have the camp of Judah, and the camp of Judah consisted of the tribe of Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Then you had the camp of Reuben, and under the camp of Reuben, you had Reuben, Simeon, and Gad. Then you had the camp of Ephraim, and with the camp of Ephraim, you have Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. Remember, we talked about Ephraim and Manasseh over here. These are the two sons of Joseph. So it's kind of interesting. When you look here, you will find that Benjamin and Joseph were brothers. And so what you have here is you have the children of Rachel on this side right here. Okay, so you have Benjamin, Manasseh, and Ephraim. And then over here at the camp of Dan, you have Naphtali, Asher, and Dan. Remember, we talked about last week and we touched on it this week. When they would break camp, Judah would go first, and then they would go to this one second, this one third, and then this camp of Dan would be the ones that would leave last. When you come in, you have 12 different tribes on the outside, and then you have the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi is all around the sanctuary right here. So as you come in, you'll find that you're coming in. If you were to make this a circle, the circle is getting smaller as you get closer to the sanctuary. There's 4 groups with the tribe of Levi. Okay, so the 4 groups are Moses and the priests come from the family of Aaron. Then you have the family of Merari, the family of Gershon, and the family of the Kohathites. And so right here, right around the sanctuary, were the Levites. Now, remember I told you earlier that God told them that they all had to always camp by their banner? Their banner? Well, the rabbinical tradition, the Jewish rabbinical tradition, is that the standard of Dan, now this is kind of switched, so it's just the way the artist's rendering is, but now we have Judah down here at the bottom. But according to the rabbinical tradition, Judah, on their standard, they had a lion. Reuben, on his standard, had a picture of a man. Ephraim, on his standard, had the picture of an ox, and Dan, on his standard, had a large picture of an eagle. So these were their standards. These were their flags, so to speak. And when you look at this, can anybody tell me where you have heard before of a lion, a man, an ox, and an eagle?
Ezekiel's wheel.
Very good. Is that Mary Jane?
Yeah, hi guys.
Hi, Mary Jane. So
Hi.
you're right. When you look at Ezekiel, in Ezekiel, it talks about the 4 cherubim that are right around God's throne. And it talks about them having 4 faces. And on their 4 faces, they have the face of a lion, the face of a man, the face of an ox, and the face of an eagle. So it's kind of interesting when we look at this. And again, this is not found in the Bible where it talks about their standards. This is rabbinical tradition. So you take it with a grain of salt. Sometimes rabbinical tradition is accurate. Sometimes it is legend. But it would be kind of interesting if this is what you have, because what you have here is you kind of have a symbol of we could say, the throne room of God in Revelation, where you have God's throne. Around God's throne are his 24 elders. And then out you have the group of people that no one can number, as well as you have the 4 living creatures around his throne that have the face of a man, the other one has the face of an ox, the other one has the face of an eagle, and the other one has the face of a lion. So it's just a little bit of just interesting stuff that I find just fascinating as you look at this. Does anybody have any questions about the camp of Israel before we move on?
What's the longest, how long did they stay at camp? When we know that they're to move when they were to follow either the cloud or the fire, what's the longest, or does it stay in the Bible?
It's a good question. I don't know that answer right off the top of my head, but as we go through in our journey over the next few weeks, we're going to follow them and hopefully we'll find the answer to that.
Okay, super. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good question. You always come up with such good questions.
Yeah, and you come up with the answers, and if you don't have them, then you make us go look to find them.
That's right.
Amen.
All right. So let's move on here. So so we're in Numbers chapter 3 and verse 39. Numbers.
Mark, I had a comment or a
Yes,
question.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
that Art?
yeah.
Hi, Art.
Hi. I'm astonished at the numbers. There's an incredible number of people there, and it looks like Levi has the smallest number of people compared to all the other tribes. You calculated that it'd be about 4 million people when you talk about the children, the wives and children, as well as the men. And I looked up the size and also the population of San Francisco. San Francisco is 3,330,000 people. And some of them are on top of other people. We have a lot of people in high rises and so on. So it looks like at least the size of San Francisco would be needed to a flat land of 7 by 7 miles would be needed in order to accommodate such a large number of people. And San Francisco is 7 by 7 miles. It's just astounding when you think about it, how long it must have taken to. They must have had runners to send the message to the other people. We're leaving now. Well, okay, well, we'll see you by tomorrow. We'll be following you. It's just
Yeah,
like
that's
that.
a good point. But that's one of the neat things about the cloud is when the cloud would rise up, everybody could see it rise up. And what some people suspect is that the cloud would rise up from the sanctuary. That would give everybody the warning, we're time to break camp. Then once everybody's ready to go, they get in, they kind of like at an airport, taxi into position and hold, right? They get into position, and then when the cloud starts moving, then they move with the cloud.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. I hadn't thought about that. The size, you'd have to have some huge walkie-talkies, which they didn't have. So we're going to find that God uses the cloud, but then he uses something else. And we're going to get to that when we get to
This also argues for the flat land of the Arabian Peninsula as the place where they wandered for those 40 years. The Sinai Peninsula has too many mountains. They would never have enough space to set up camp.
Okay.
We covered that before. It's quite astounding. Now, are you also going to talk about the symbols for the other tribes? You've got basically the symbols of 4 of the tribes, 4 lead tribes.
It appears that that's all we have is 4 banners. So if you remember, you have, let me see, I might be wrong, but let's go back to Leviticus chapter 2 and let's just look at verse 2, Numbers chapter 2, verse 2. Everyone of the tribe of Israel shall camp by his own standard, beside the emblems of his father's house. They shall camp some distance from the tabernacle of meeting. So we talked about the standards, the 4 standards, but then you have the emblems. And so it appeared that you have a very organized method where you have 3 tribes under one standard, and then each family's house, each family's father's, so to speak, clan has an emblem there as well. So you'll find this in verse 2. Every one of the children of Israel shall camp by his own standard beside the emblems of his father's house. They shall camp some distance from the tabernacle of meeting. Verse 3, on the east side, toward the rising of the sun, those of the standard of the forces of Judah shall camp according to their armies. And Nachshon, the son of Abinadab, shall be the leader of the children of Judah. Then verse 5, those who camp next to him shall be the tribe of Issachar, and Nathanael, the son of Zor, shall be the leader of the children of Issachar. Verse 7, then comes the tribe of Zebulun. Notice when you look at Issachar and Zebulun, it doesn't say anything about standards. It only talks about Judah having a standard. Now let's go down to verse 8. And his army was numbered at 57,400. Verse 9, all who were numbered according to their armies of the forces with Judah, 186,400, these shall break camp first. Then verse 10, on the south side shall be the standard of the forces of Reuben. So it appears, and I could be wrong, but this is what it looks like to me, is this is Judah and Issachar and Zebulun, but this was considered the camp of Judah. And so you had the standard of Judah here. And then over here you have Reuben, Simeon, and Gad, and this was considered the camp of Reuben. And so you have one standard for them.
Right. I
So
understand what you're saying.
I don't see a standard for Issachar, but it does talk about the emblems of the family. So the way I see this is, if you ever go to a large camp meeting or a large campsite, you'll have this is campsite K, and then this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or this is campsite, Meadows, and then you have K1, K2, K3, and J1, J2, J. That's kind of the way I see it, is that you'd have one big, huge standard. And I can even imagine as they're going through the wilderness, they're, walking, following their standard like a standard bearer. And then you have the families organized behind them with their kind of standards or emblems. That's kind of the way I see it.
Yeah, I think so. They need to have standards. I've read somewhere that the leader of each of the 12 tribes, would have the standard in front of his tent. His tent would be the center tent in the front.
Yeah, and you bring that out because you'll find where each of those leaders is mentioned by name here too.
Yeah. Now there's two sources for the choice of emblems. There's the symbolism that comes from Jacob just before he dies. But there's also Moses. Moses, I think in Deuteronomy, talks about the tribes and gives them more symbols. So that's how that.
Art, you are a researcher. Can you look into that for us and see if you can find more about that? Because when I looked at the stuff from Jacob on his deathbed, the only thing I could find was Judah is a lion's whelp. And so we refer to it as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. But I would love it if you could do a little bit more research on that and come back for it next week.
Oh yeah, they each had a symbol. I mean, a lot of them were illiterate. They can only understand visual symbols.
Yeah, but maybe you could also look in rabbinical literatures as well.
Okay, I'll do what I can.
Cool. Yeah.
Pastor Mark,
Yes.
just one question on verse 38. I'm enlighten me, please. Why do the strangers that cometh near shall be put to death? Why do they need to die? And who are these strangers that they are referring to?
I would be speculating, so let me answer that next week.
Okay, thank you.
I think that strangers were allowed to come, but this seems to imply that there is a nefarious purpose of these outsiders kind of wanting to come and sneak over
okay.
and you know what I mean, type of stuff. But I'll have to look and see. Maybe strangers were not allowed around the sanctuary. I'll have to look at that.
All right.
Good question.
Thank you.
You're like Mary Jane. You stump me.
Sorry.
No, I like it. I love to have something to study.
Yeah, Lynn.
Okay, let's take a look here, and I'm just going to summarize the rest of this chapter, okay? You can read it if you'd like, but starting at verse 40, actually, no, going back to verse 39. All who were numbered of the Levites, when Moses and Aaron numbered at the commandment of the Lord by their families, all the males from a month old and above were 22,000. This is the interesting thing, and Art touched on this, how small this tribe was, because the other tribes were numbered from the age of 20 up. This one is numbered from the ages of 1 month and up, and they still are the smallest of the tribes. So I don't know why they're so small. I don't know if they were extremely persecuted there in Egypt. That is my speculation. And the reason I speculate that is for two reasons. One is Satan probably realized that they were, so to speak, a blessed group, and he wanted to persecute them even more, inspired humans to persecute them more. Another thing we see is that in their names, they had a lot of El, the name of God in their names. And usually severe persecution gets you closer to God. But it's just kind of interesting how they are so little, and yet they've been given such a big task, such a big task. Their task is to directly care for God's temple. And it's just a reminder to us tonight as we close. It doesn't matter how big you are, how strong you are, your background, you've been given the best, greatest task of anybody in the universe, and that is to care for God's temple. Your body is the temple of God. You don't have to worry what I do with my temple. You don't have to worry what somebody else down the street does with their temple. You have your temple that you can exercise self-control, willpower, and with God's help, you can make your temple a shining sanctuary for God. And as a result of that, you can be a witness to other people as well. The rest of this chapter just talks about the Levites dedicated instead of the firstborn, and they had a very specific ritual when you would dedicate a firstborn to God. And so what they did was they did this with the Levites. So when you look, God took Aaron, and there was an ordination service. There was a setting apart service for Aaron when he became the high priest. Then you have a dedication service for the priests when they became priests, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. Then you have a dedication service for the Levites as the firstborn of God to have the spiritual birthright, the spiritual blessing in Israel. They weren't blessed with the birthright so that they could be better than everybody else, and we're more spiritual than everybody else. They were blessed because they were going to use their blessings to serve others. So you remember, we read about Moses and the priests, how their tent was right there at the entrance to the tabernacle. And why? They were to serve the needs of the people. The Levites, they were blessed with the spiritual advantages in Israel. Why? Not to sit around and just become very obese and just sit there and say, well, we're the Levites, we're God's people. No, they were blessed so that they could use those blessings and help others as well. Same with us. I believe that right now, every single one of you that's here with us tonight and watching online, you've been blessed as well by God. Whether you're a Seventh-day Adventist or a Catholic or a Baptist or whoever, when you have a desire to study Scripture and live up to all the light you have, you've been blessed by God as well. And so we have been blessed by God like the Levites to use that blessing to share it with others, to a blessing to others. So chapter 3, verse 40 through 51 is their special dedication, redemption that occurred. And then what we're going to do is next week, we're going to pick up and just briefly cover chapter 4, where it just really talks about exactly the job description of the Kohathites, the Merarites, and the Gershonites. What exactly did they do? And it's really fascinating. It actually tells us in the Bible how they would pack up the sanctuary and get it ready to go. And if you want to read ahead, pay close attention to the color. Look at the color. It's amazing, the color. All right, our time's up. Let's bow our heads for prayer. God in heaven, we want to thank you for being a God of order, a God of discipline, a God that can take just a hodgepodge group of slaves and give them the identity of being your kingdom, your children. We thank you, God, for doing that in our lives as well. We have an identity. Our identity as sons and daughters of God. I pray for the people right now that just are going through difficult times, the people that are going through health concerns. I pray that you would be with Pastor Roldan in a special way with the important decisions that he has to make as he prepares for this mission trip, as well as the missionaries. And we just pray that all of us would just draw closer to you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. For those of you who can hang around, unmute yourselves and let's chat for 15 minutes.
Pastor Mark,
Is that my good friend Bong?
I think so.
Hey, it's so cool. I can see the sunset over your shoulder.
Would you send me that the screen to share, please?
The screen to share?
The one you shared to us, the numbers of tribes.
Oh, the Camp of Israel?
Yes, because I'm looking at it as that's how the military was based. You know, the division. We know that Moses was a military genius or whatever, but in the heart was the sanctuary. And he goes by, I want to study it, you know, but in that screen you shared to us, in the middle is the sanctuary where God resides or whatever, you know, when he's more like one of the 4-star general, you know, and things like that.
Yeah, so what you will find is that if you closely look at the sanctuary, you will find you have the sanctuary. Then, let me just put this back up here. And I just put it in the chat, Glenn, so tell me if you can download that.
Okay.
So over here, you have the sanctuary, and then you have the Levites. And remember, the Levites were the ones that were to care for the tabernacle. And down the road, they're going to be instructing the people. So you could almost say that you have the Merari and the Gershonites and the Kohathites, and they are focused on teaching the people about the gospel, so to speak. Then you have Moses. You only have one Moses.
Mm.
And what is Moses? Moses is the prophet. So you have the prophet, and then you have Aaron. Well, who is Aaron? Aaron is the high priest. You only have one high priest. And then you have the priests. Until they start ordaining their kids that are coming up, you only have two priests, Ithamar and Eleazar. Okay. Now, here's the neat thing. When you look at this, these groups out here, you could say is the warriors. This is the army of Israel out here. That's why they numbered them, everybody 20 years and above. So this is the armies. This is the spiritual educators here. Over here, you have the prophet, the high priest, and the priests. But where's the king? The king is right here on his throne. So when you look at it, it's like you have a whole civil, kingdom with everything you need right here, and God is their king. Now, what we call this in theological terms is a theocracy. Theo is God. I don't know what cracy means. I would say government. So you can have a monarchy. You can have a monarchy is where you have a king that's in charge. You can have a democracy where the people are in charge. You can have a theocracy, and theocracy is where you have God in charge. So when you look there, that's kind of like, you have, like you were saying, it's like a military thing where you have, one prophet, one high priest, priests, Levites, and then all of the families with their standards.
Yeah, when I was looking at it, it's the tabernacle was more like a core, and then
Yeah.
around it is the battalion, and then northwest, southeast, the camp of Dan, camp of Reuben was the division. Wow, it's beautiful. It's really beautiful. That's why I was asking you. I need to study this, and then compare it to today's military.
Yeah. Now, Bong, did the Camp of Israel PowerPoint come through?
Yeah, it did.
All right. And this is why I'm looking forward to the research Art's going to hopefully uncover for us, is more about their standards. Because it's kind of like that awesome military, I mean, one of the things that's really great about Pathfinders or the Boy Scouts or the military is just the discipline and the cohesiveness. And it's just kind of like, I mean, just imagine, okay, think with me for a moment. You're in the fortress of Jericho, and across the Jordan River, suddenly you have this group of people that could be a few million just come boom, 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 boom. They just kind of boom, pour in, settle. And it's just almost like a dance, right? It's like this huge dance like we see in North Korea or something, where you have hundreds of people and everybody's just doing this stuff like before Olympics or something. Like, wow, how did you do that, right? And they're just like boom, 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 boom. And suddenly it's like within 2 hours, camp is up, the sanctuary is up. You have this cloud that just sort of right down in the sanctuary. And then you're watching and you're like, you have your spies out and they can't believe what they're seeing. And suddenly they break camp and then they walk down. And as they walk down to the Jordan River just opens right up and they come across. And then they camp right out there. And if you go over to Jordan today, you're I think 6 or 8 miles from Jericho down to Jordan. So it's not like, they're not right on the bank of the Jordan River. So then they cross over and then they all make camp again. Cloud comes down. And then suddenly they come walking over and there's not a word that's spoken. And they just go around like with their banners. They walk all the way around Jericho. They go back. Next. I mean, it's just like when you think about this, you're just kind of like, it's like a well-orchestrated show, but it's for the people in Jericho. It was a terrifying show.
Thank you so much, Pastor Mark.
Oh, Mark,
Yes, Art.
the people that are into heraldry, coats of arms and all that, they've kept
Oh, yeah.
alive a lot of the symbols. For example, Reuben, Jacob said he was unstable like water. Well, 3 wavy lines, blue lines, became his symbol. And you'll see that on some coats of arms even today, along with other symbols. Sometimes people have 3 or 4 symbols representing different lines of genealogy. So even the Romans had standards. Even the Romans had symbols as well. They copied some other things that the Jews did as well, such as having what do you call it? The years of what do you call it? 50 years. Every 50 years. Jubilee, right? They had Jubilee. The Romans had Jubilee, and their Jubilee was not based on something biblical. It was based on the founding of Rome, and that brought it right up to the time of Christ. One of their Jubilees was right before Christ was born, and that Jubilee was turned into a celebration of Augustus, because he created 14 years of peace, and the taxes that were raised were a present to him, and so that explains why it wasn't a normal kind of tax. It was a Jubilee celebration tax that the Jews were obligated to pitch in on as well. So this is just to show you the ancient world had shared a lot of these different ideas, jubilees as well as banners and standards and so on.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because Jesus made a very clear prophecy in Matthew. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let him that is in Judea flee to the mountains. Don't even go down and get your coat out of your house, get out of town, right? Well, the abomination of desolation was the Roman standard, the Roman emblem that was taken and planted right over in the area of Jerusalem, because it was considered holy ground several hundred yards away from the temple wall, from the city wall. So Jesus says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, leave town. Well, what happened was the Romans came, they planted the banner there, essentially, this is ours, we are laying siege to this town.
Yeah.
And then they got word that there was a problem down, I believe, in Egypt. The Romans fell back, and the Jews opened up the city gates and took out after them with such a violence that they really inflicted a lot of damage on the Romans. But when the city walls opened, the gates opened, the Christians inside had remembered this prophecy of Jesus when he says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, leave town now. And so the Romans come up, put their standard there, then they leave, the gates open, and all of the zealots and all of the Sicarii and the other people go rushing out of Jerusalem after the Romans. The Christians ran out as well, but instead of chasing the Romans, they got out of town. And according to historians, not one Christian perished in the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, it's interesting because when you look at the legions that came up to Jerusalem, there were several legions. I think there was 3 or 4 legions that came up, but one of them was the 10th Fortensis, the 10th legion known as the Fortensis. The Fortensis was stationed in Galilee, and their banner was a boar, a large pig. So that would have been very disgusting for the Jewish people to have this banner placed right there outside the walls of Jerusalem if it was a large boar. Now, just a little to kind of go along with what you were saying here, I'm just going to share with you my screen, but you have something known as the Aquila. And the Aquila was a eagle that was on top of their standard. And it says, an Aquila was the prominent symbol used in ancient Rome, especially as the standard of a Roman legion. A legionary known as an Aquilifer, the eagle bearer, carried this standard. Each legion carried one eagle. The eagle had quasi-religious importance to the Roman soldier, far beyond being merely a symbol of his legion. To lose a standard was extremely grave, and the Roman military went to great lengths both to protect a standard and to recover it if it were lost. After the annihilation of 3 legions in the Teutoburg forest, the Romans spent decades retaliating for the defeat while also attempting to recover the 3 lost eagles. Goes down, it talks about these Aquila eagles there. And at the very end, it says, in military stratagems, it was sometimes necessary to conceal the standards. Although the Romans commonly considered it a point of honor to preserve their standards, in some cases of extreme danger, the leader himself threw them among the ranks of the enemy in order to divert their attention or to animate his own soldiers. A wounded or dying standard bearer delivered it, if possible, into the hands of the general for whom he had received it, Signus Acceptus. But it's just interesting, like you were saying, how other people had standards, and particularly the Romans, they took it to a very, to be a standard bearer for the to be a standard bearer for the Romans was just one of the highest honors. There was one I had read about, one standard bearer for the Romans, that everybody was getting discouraged and outnumbered and slaughtered, and the standard bearer just grabbed the standard. He just ran as fast as he could, and the remaining soldiers were like, we don't want our standard to be lost, so they took out after him, and they actually won the battle. It was just one of those kind of interesting stories where the standard is just like, you do anything you can to keep the standard from being hurt or taken. And it's kind of like the flag, kind of like the American flag. It represents the standard of the American Army. And that's why when you find people that, stomp on the flag or burn the flag, you'll find military people and they're like, no, don't you do that to my flag, because that represents their country. That represents what they stand for.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else? Questions, comments before we close tonight?
Pastor Mark.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, your speculation was correct, because I looked at the Blue Letter Bible, and it says here, it also lays a charge on the priests as doorkeepers in God's house to take care that none should come near who are forbidden by the law. They must keep off all intruders whose approach would be to the profanation of the holy things, telling them that if they came near it, was at their peril, they would die by the hands of God, as Asa did.
Okay.
Yeah, chapters 151. The strangers that come at nigh shall be put to death. There you go.
Yeah, I think that's good research on your part, because I think that not only are they there to help people worship, but they're also there to guard God's sacred, guard God's holy. And this was not a tourist destination. This was not a amusement, like, oh yeah, let's go check out the temple. This is like, if you come, it's to worship. And if you're just over here to loot in the middle of the night or something like that, the penalty was death. And that just shows the significance and reverence of it. So, wow, thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, Art.
That's my dad talking.
Oh, is your dad here?
Well,
Oh, wow. Hello, Mr. Conrad.
Hi.
Wow, this is so cool. All right. Well, I think we'll sign off now, and let's look forward to seeing everybody on Friday evening. Friday evening, we're starting the lecture. Sorry, we're starting the miracles of Elisha and looking at the life of Elisha. So this is going to be a really fascinating journey, because in the story of Elijah, you'll find just a few snippets of miracles. The story of Elisha, it gets into a lot more detail. It's just rich with detail, rich with stories, and I love stories. All right, good night, everybody.
night.
Night. Thank you, everyone. God bless you all.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye. See you Friday.
See you Friday.
Okay.